So hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Recently there has been a significant update in clinical research landscape, especially in the approval section in India, and that is for parallel submission processing of clinical trial applications. And this is a significant event. A lot of you are looking for analysis on this particular update, and in this video we'll be focusing on what exactly is the update, how it will affect you as a clinical research professional, and how it impacts the entire global drug approval process. Okay, so make sure that you subscribe to the channel and let's begin to understand that. So first and foremost, let us understand that the recent update on 11th of May by the CDSCO was nothing but a significant regulatory shift. Okay, and we need to understand what was the shift, what was there previously, and what actually happened in this update. So let us see what it was before. Okay, what was the process before? So before, the approval process was sequential, where you started by submitting your application to the CDSCO, which is the Indian regulatory. Then you waited for the Central Licensing Authority for approval or rejection, and only after approval or rejection, if it is approved, then you approach the ethics committee. Okay, then the ethics committee used to review it after the CDSCO decision, and which essentially led to a lot of delays. Okay, there were a significant delay because first the CDSCO would take time to review, then the ethics committee would take time to review, and then you got the approval for the study. Okay, and this particular had a significant impact in overall approval timeline because the sponsor has to wait for each and every stakeholder. But now there has been a significant change. Okay, and this particular change will reduce the approval timeline from years to a few months. Okay, and that is significant because the global clinical trial which are parallelly running across the world will not wait for India to get the regulatory approval. And then, because even I was a part of clinical research industry, and currently I'm working on the other side, but still I understood that there was significant regulatory approval delay, and those hampered our ability to recruit subject from India, and India used to get a lot of less subject. But the industry, the government has finally answered, okay, the call for the industry, and they have introduced the parallel process. Okay, now what is the parallel process? In this parallel process, what essentially happens is you can submit simultaneously to the CDSCO as well as the ethics committee. Okay, first we used to wait for CDSCO approval and then go for ethics committee, but now we can submit simultaneously to the both stakeholders. Again, both stakeholders can review concurrently and independently. Okay, and you do not need any particular central licensing authority for the EC to review. EC can begin independent review and they can give their approval, okay, or suggest any particular changes independent of the CDSU approval. Earlier, CDS ethics committee would used to ask us that do you have the central licensing authority approval, and then and only then they used to take our application for EC review. But now they can independently review the clinical trial and not wait for the CDSU approval. Okay, and this particular change has been in chapter 3 of the NDCT 20R, and when it comes to EC, it is under rule 8 of NDCT 2019. Okay, and this has directly impacted on dramatic reduction of the overall timeline, because imagine for CDSO, the timeline for reviewing the application and providing approval is anywhere around 30 days to 45 days. And at the same time, if you could submit it to the AC, you get AC approval respectively or relatively quickly. Okay, so it will take anywhere around 30 to 45 days for getting approval for both the stakeholders. Earlier it used to go on for months and months, but now you can be assured that if you come to India, bring your clinical trial, the approval timeline is quite competitive with the rest of the world. Okay, and that is a significant regulatory shift when it comes to clinical trial approval. Now that the parallel approval has been approved, let us understand how the clinical research industry will impact. Okay, how the India's clinical research ecosystem will benefit from it. So the first point would be the benefit for sponsors and CROs, because they are the one who had to wait for regulatory authority. Okay, the ethics committee, and sponsors used to get frustrated by waiting. But through the parallel submission, the plan to start up clinical trial can be more predictable. Okay, it will reduce the operational cost as well as increase the site activation speed, which means that there will be more recruitment, more sites in the clinical trial. Okay, and that will directly have impact on more clinical trials coming to India and more clinical research jobs. Okay, next thing is the ethics committee. Okay, now the advantage for ethics committee is they do not have to wait for CDSCO approval, but under Rule 8 of the NDCT 2019, they can directly review the clinical trial independently of the government agency, that is CDSCO, and without any bureaucratic dependency. Okay, then for investigators and site, the best advantage that they are getting is that they can onboard to the clinical trial faster. There will be faster initiations, improving the number of clinical trials coming to their site. It has direct impact on their revenue cycles also, and it will make the Indian sites more competitive for global studies. The next advantage would be patient access. Obviously, if there are more clinical trials coming to India for Indian market, then the access for cutting edge clinical trial and treatment would improve significantly, and that will help a lot of people, especially in oncology, rare disease, and novel biologics clinical trial. Okay, so patient access will have a significant impact. Again, next advantage would be in global competitiveness. So as I've previously said that the regulatory approval model for US FDA, EMA were competitive and relatively quicker than India. But now since India has fastened enough the process, it makes India globally competitive. Okay, and that is a significant thing because India has such a diverse and large population. It needs clinical trial, and the clinical research professional in India also need a lot of jobs. So definitely India being more globally competitive brings more trial to India. It has direct impact on the competitive ability of Indian clinical research industry. Next would be the regulatory efficiency. So definitely allowing parallel review, parallel submission, it has direct impact on application processing speed because both the stakeholder would be independently involved in the review of the study, and the timeline will be drastically reduced, and it will lead to more application towards the Indian clinical trial market, not only for the regulatory but also for ethics committee. And India will attract a lot of clinical trials from across the world, and India will be at par with the entire world when it comes to clinical research. So Indian clinical research industry has a major impact from this parallel submission approval. Now let us see what are the four key takeaway, okay, for this particular update. So the first and foremost is that with this update, you need immediate process change for the sponsor, CRO, EC as well as CDSU, because now the timeline has reduced, so everyone has to update their processes, okay, so that the regulatory SOPs, the submission timeline will get enhanced. Next part would be the ethics committee has to speed up their process because now they can independently act. Okay, so they can begin taking study and build independent capacity and timeline. Again, next would be the strategic opportunity for India, where this particular parallel submission improves India's position and makes it competitive with regulatory environments across the world, which will directly impact the global pharma companies coming to India and bringing their trials early. Last but not the least, compliance. Okay, so although it is a parallel submission, all stakeholders must ensure that their compliance is directed as per the DCGI, which is Dr. Rajiv Singh Raghuvanshi, and CDSU will closely monitor each and every ethics committee also. So we have to ensure that we do not rush the approval or review process. We have to ensure that compliance is maintained. Okay, and DCGI also has the additional responsibility to ensure that the CDSU also doesn't fasten up the process while compromising the review. Okay, so I hope I was able to explain you the parallel submission and decision taking by the CDSU for Indian regulatory, and I hope you were able to learn the significant aspect of parallel submission and how it will help the Indian clinical research industry in speeding up the site initiation as well as the approval process.